Minister, you've spoken quite a lot about our levels of public debt. I'm interested in the correlation to private debt in particular. So I guess just as a starter for 10, could you tell us what the level of private or household debt is currently in this country?
What is critically important is that incomes are able to keep up with prices. We have been through a period in New Zealand history in which inflation has far exceeded wage increases, with the impact that people's real wage position across many households reduced. And that, of course, can lead to debt accumulation. There are also choices which individual households and families make about the level of savings that they maintain. But a key contributor to private debt in New Zealand, which I know you are conscious of, is housing affordability. And what we know in New Zealand is that we have been through a period in history when house price increases have been significant and have outpaced wage growth, meaning that many households have had to take on more debt in order to have housing security. And I will never forget the year in which you and I sat as opposition members around this table, in which house prices increased 30% in 1 year under a Labour government. In terms of contribution to debt positions, that was very significant.
Can you tell me your understanding of the differential between the kind of cost of debt servicing for a household versus for the government?
Well, debt servicing, of course, has a very real cost. In the case of the government, the interest bill on New Zealand's debt will be rising from 9 to more than 12 billion over the forecast period. $9 billion is a difficult figure to conceive, so to give you a sense of it, that would be enough to fund the annual operating costs of the following functions combined: the New Zealand Police Force, the New Zealand Defence Force, the New Zealand Customs Service, the entire New Zealand Prison Service, and the entire Ministry of Justice. So that interest bill is significant, and there is an opportunity cost for each of those dollars which would otherwise have been able to be invested in public services. One of the things that New Zealanders look to the government for is a sense of security that were there to be a significant economic shock, be that a major climatic event, a biosecurity incursion, a significant earthquake, they would want the government to be in a position where it could undertake borrowing that households may not be able to undertake in order to buffer against shocks. We have seen that following the Christchurch earthquake with the wage protections that were put in place. We saw that during COVID with the wage and business support payments that were put in place. So to some extent, I think it is the expectation of New Zealand households that the government maintain prudent enough levels of debt that it can be there on the rainy day. And I think that that balance is appropriate. We simply cannot take our credit rating for granted. There are two observable factors which credit rating agencies are watching very closely in New Zealand's case. The first is the historic size of our current account deficit, and the second is our ongoing deficit and debt positions, which have slipped successively in recent years. And that rating matters not just to us because of our debt servicing costs and therefore our ability to borrow globally, but also the run-on effect it has for every New Zealander with debt, who will find that their interest bill is higher if there is a credit rating downgrade. So the government's decisions on its management of its own fiscal position have real and material effects for New Zealanders. I do empathise with the member's concern, which is that New Zealanders who are carrying high levels of debt face a financial burden. The question is, how does the government best address that? And it is my philosophical view that the best way that we address that is create the economic conditions in which New Zealanders can have more secure jobs, can face greater wage increases, are in an environment of stable inflation, are in an environment where interest rates aren't so high that their debt servicing becomes unbearable. And all of those factors go to good economic management. And overwhelmingly, it is countries that are wealthier, it is countries that have grown faster, that are better able to provide the choices and opportunities for individuals and households that allow them to have more comfortable debt positions.
And why do you believe that Standard & Poor's downgraded our councils in terms of their credit ratings in March? What did they tell us?
The commentary, which I don't have to hand, as I recall, reflected the fact that they had concerns about the ways that some of our councils are managing their debt position, are making choices about their investments, and their deficit positions.
So do you understand that investment in our infrastructure in particular and in our public sector capacity can improve our resilience and reduce the impact of entirely predictable shocks, whether they be, for example, environmental shocks or otherwise?
Yes, I do, which is why the government is committed to ongoing infrastructure investment in resilience and productivity enhancing investments. I would also point out the corollary, which that member tends to forget, which is that every dollar of infrastructure investment that the government makes is ultimately, and I'll just finish my answer if I can, Mr. Chair,
Please.
Is ultimately funded by taxpayers. Taxpayers either today providing tax to the government that would otherwise be their own income, or taxpayers tomorrow who are required to pay off debt when it becomes unmanageable. Now, if we were to tax New Zealanders more, and I recognise that that is the member's position, I believe she wishes to add $44 billion worth of taxes to New Zealanders.
New Zealanders pay less
the
than
impact
tax.
of that for individual New Zealanders would be to reduce their financial choices, resilience and security. More to the point, I believe putting that level of additional tax on our economy at this moment in our economic recovery would put that recovery at risk, therefore jeopardising the jobs and incomes of every working Kiwi. I think you've seen in our recent budget this government's tenacious willingness to address the fact that New Zealand needs greater rates of capital intensity and productivity enhancing investments in our firms. That is precisely why we introduced the investment boost policy to provide a genuine tax incentive for firms to make investments in capital, which will enhance their ability to be more productive and to grow faster. It is also why we have identified, as have several IMF and OECD reports, that one of the factors leading to New Zealand's low rates of capital intensity is the fact that we have a very restrictive set of rules when it comes to foreign direct investment. And in fact, very low rates of foreign direct investment when compared to other countries that we like to compare ourselves with. It is simply the case that countries that better allow foreign capital to flow into their firms and productive sectors are better able to reach the levels of capital intensity that lead to greater productivity and wage growth. So that is why the government is both reforming the Overseas Investment Act and introducing Invest New Zealand to ensure that we are better able to capture cash from around the world looking for a home. Because if that cash can help create better New Zealand jobs and better New Zealand incomes, we should be rolling out the welcome mat, not putting out the stop sign.
Last supplementary.
May I
we'll
ask
move on.
why you choose to cherry pick and overblow one particular variable with regard to, for example, the access to international capital when the IMF, the OECD and a range of international players have consistently pointed out that the biggest barrier to productive investment in this country is our tax distortions, which see money flowing into housing?
I disagree with the member's characterisation, and I could equally accuse you of cherry picking. The most recent OECD report on the New Zealand economy was very clear about two things that we should be doing right now. One, undertaking fiscal consolidation in the face of deteriorating books and
which we can do from a revenue side.
demographic challenges. And two, focusing on productivity enhancing and growth enhancing reform. That is exactly what the government is doing, and I'm happy with the economic choices we are making.
I just wanted to understand your understanding of the multiplier effect of government spending.
Well, that depends on the quality of government spending, and it is wrong to assume that every time that the government spends a dollar that creates positive impact,
such as
because there is always an opportunity cost, which is that you then need to consider, would the dollar spent through government consumption create more positive impact than a dollar spent through private consumption? And certainly when you look through the books over recent years, the shift in New Zealand has been increasing amounts of our overall economic resource being tied up by the state with higher rates of government spending proportional to our economy. That has coincided with decreasing rates of productivity by the state, which is to say that the impact it has had from the spending it has made has been low. And anecdotally, members will have heard this from members of the public who say, well, I know that we racked up more than $120 billion of extra debt under the last government. I know that spending blew out, but what do we have to show for it? And so we are always conscious in this government that when the private sector has more resources, it can make good discretionary choices about where to invest and how to spend that in many cases can be productivity and growth enhancing. Over the past 6 years, when the last Labor government went on a spending party of levels quite outside what had occurred in our other economic history, the result of that was pretty clear. More than $120 billion of extra debt, very little productive infrastructure assets to show for it, a significant spike in inflation and interest rates, a strangling of genuine, real economic activity. And for many New Zealanders, they were left at the end of that period worse off, not better off. So it's easy to talk about making careful fiscal choices, but the evidence is that when Labor Green governments are given the chequebook, they do not make wise choices.
If I may,
Okay,
this in, Mr.
okay, you can
Chair.
have one more sup, and then we're going to go to Todd for a sup, and then
Hold this.
sustain from Dr. Wood.
just sorry.
You need to impose some order on this committee.
I do,
yeah,
however,
okay.
just respectfully, Minister, want to ask there, but you accept that the response to COVID was something which is quite different from the proposal which the Greens have on the table, which is planned, credible and transparent investment in our productive infrastructure and our economic resilience.
Look,
Do you accept that those two things are different?
Look, I'm sorry, Chlöe, but I do not accept that a plan that seeks to confiscate tens of billions of dollars of New Zealanders' assets, savings and income in the form of new taxes would be good for the productivity of our economy. I do not accept that burdening the New Zealand economy with tens of billions of more debt on the promise that somehow the Greens would decide that cycleways and light rail are no longer important and that productive investments would be made in the future is credible. I am prepared to concede. At least you have a plan. We don't even know whether Labor want more debt, more tax,
Okay.
less spending.
Okay,
So I'll give you that.
Thank you. Thank
Can you tell me specifically what is prudent about not having a cap on the investment boost policy?
Because what we want to see is the maximum amount of investment and productive assets in this economy to drive productivity and wage growth. And one of the examples that has been raised publicly is, oh my goodness, this might mean that someone comes from overseas and invests in a major
Oil
manufacturing
rigs.
facility, a major wind farm, and therefore is able to pay less tax on those assets. Well, I say, bring it on. Because if people want to come and make significant investments because of the investment boost policy, investments they wouldn't have otherwise made, then that is the policy.
And just to be clear, that extends to
Last
OM.
one, Chloe.
Yeah, just to be clear, investment boost in particular would allow for OMV, a multinational fossil fuel corporation, to come over here and to get access to effectively that taxpayer subsidised investment.
Well, the advice we had from the IRD is that the way to make this policy the most effective was not to rinky-dink it with exclusions and exceptions, that by having a broad base to the policy, we would have the least distortionary effect on investment choices.
Distortions.
The better way to
Okay.
make those choices is through regulation and through the government's rules.
You don't like
And I would
regulation.
put to the member that the decision by the last government to ban offshore oil and gas exploration is one of the most real things that has driven up electricity prices and the cost of living for
takes
every
16
single
years.
New
Right, we're
Zealander.
gonna go-
And you should hang your head in shame about that policy.
Okay, thank you.
My understanding of the analysis from officials is that investment boost can contribute towards GDP growth, but can you point us specifically to where that says that we will have wage growth as a result as
Yes,
well?
that is specific and it's in the documents we released on budget day. The effect on wage growth is expected to be 1.5% over a 20-year period, with at least half of that front-loaded into the first 5 years. In fact, in the regulatory impact statement, which is available to the member, the IRD make clear that they expect the beneficiaries of the investment boost policy to be New Zealand workers, both through increased employment opportunities and wage increases, that the benefits of the policy will be very broadly spread throughout the economy. The impact on wage growth, it is very easy to understand, which is when a business is more productive due to higher rates of capital intensity, it is better able to pay its workers more. That is a significant factor in those economies who do pay their workers more. They are more capital intensive, they are more productive, they have higher paid workers. That's exactly what we want to achieve and was a huge driver behind our introduction of the investment boost policy.
So are we to take it from your fiscal strategy, your general rhetoric and your argument today that you believe that growth will trickle down? And if so, what are you basing that belief upon, if not 40 years of evidence and experience that shows the opposite?
Well, what I believe is that those countries which have wealthier economies are able to pay their people more, have more resources available to invest in public service provision, to protect the environment, to deliver social outcomes. That countries that are wealthier provide their people better choices. And the most obvious example of this, and it must be raised with you as it is raised with me, is when someone says, I think my child is going to get paid more in Australia. I say to them, you know what? That is why it is so critical that we focus on growth, because fundamentally Australia is about 30% richer than us, and richer countries pay their workers more. And I'm not prepared to settle back and just say, let's let New Zealand allow ourselves to be a poorer country that pays people less, that has less money to invest in public services. Let's be ambitious and aspirational for growth, and let's not put our recovery at risk by saddling this economy with billions more in taxes and debt, as you would do.
What intentional new redistributional policies have you implemented in your time as Minister of Finance that would go
One
against...
of the most regressive things that occurred under the last government.
That would go against
Come on.
the understanding that we can take from all of your answers today that you are simply hoping that growth trickles down.
Okay. So three key things. Three key regressive policies that the last government did. One, allowed inflation to soar out of control. Inflation harms the poorest most who have the fewest choices.
Tradable inflation
Two,
Okay,
to
quiet.
allowed
international
for bracket
Order.
creep in our
Order.
progressive
Reason
income
that
tax
you
system,
say
Order.
which meant that lower income workers were paying a bigger proportion of their wage
Again,
in
the
tax.
minister needs to stick to the
Three,
question.
allowing for public
the chair
spending
should.
to occur in ways that didn't deliver an efficiency dividend. Those dollars would have been
More than
better
happy to cut
kept
all
in
the
those
ribbons,
low-income
all the
households.
Okay.
If I
And-
may,
hospitals.
And
Just
Mr.
quiet,
Chair,
please.
our choice to adjust tax brackets delivered benefits to lower and middle income working people. Our choice to adjust working for families entitlements delivered benefits to lower and middle income people. And any government that chooses to let inflation get out of control and bracket creep to be the way that it funds its extravagant promises
Yeah, this
is
is
punishing
One more
the
question.
poor for its bad
Okay,
fiscal
thank
Hear
you.
the
management.
meeting.
Okay, order.
again, yeah, just to be clear, my question was
Yeah.
about what
Look
you
at it,
had
it's all
done
boys.
as minister and the income tax changes that you yourself referenced.
Sorry,
The
point of
official-
order.
No,
I'm sorry, point of order. The opposite members making sexist remarks across there. I think they would have learned from yesterday just to tone it down, behave
I
properly.
just
and
want to
we'll
talk
let-
about the economy.
Yes,
Can we
thank
please
you.
do
We'll let
that?
Ms. Fulbright
Look, can we just do
answer
the
that
last
question.
order? Can we just do the last 3 minutes? We've been so good, haven't we? Can we just do the last 3 minutes in silence, other than the questioner and the answer?
Thank you. My question was to you, what, as Minister of Finance, have you done in your tenure to intentionally address growing inequality?
Focused very hard on making sure inflation is under control, the most regressive tax there can be on working people and low income people. Ensured that we are supporting policies which drive growth and therefore job creation and income
So
growth.
trickle down.
And
Yep.
I would put to you that when you do bracket adjustment, what you ensure is that people on lower levels of income pay less
That's right.
tax. And it is the fact that a significant proportion of households overall are recipients of funding from the Crown rather than net taxpayers. And so it is more difficult to impact them through that tax system. But our changes to working for families, our changes to Family Boost have ensured that a number of low-income families facing high costs have received additional income. Our adjustments to the Super Gold scheme for the rates rebates have ensured that a number of low-income households will get additional income. Our policies are targeted. I'll tell you one thing that doesn't solve poverty. What doesn't solve poverty is making countries poorer. If you want to solve poverty, the answer to poverty is wealth. You have to create wealth to create less poverty.
Yeah,
And
through
so
productive
your approach
investment.
of saying, let's divide the pie into ever smaller pieces and hope that it doesn't bleed out is wrong and has been proven time and time again throughout history. And I reckon New Zealanders know it. And the question is just when Labor will admit they're on the same page.
Okay.
Come on.
That's
Now,
not
if
what
we
I
can-
said.
thank
and
you.
That's not what the Green
We're
policy
going to go to order. Order.